Ali just did an interview, doing a podcast. Topic of Belal Muhammad and what is next came up. Now, Ali says, I'm not going to break the news of Belal's fight on your podcast. Looking like December. Title defense for Belal. And by the way, Belal will fight anybody. That's the UFC's choice. But as I continue, and by the way, guys, I read this as opposed to listening. So there's just enough room for error. But I want to share what my mind thought. I thought that at some point in there, Ali had narrowed it down to I can't tell you who, but Kamaru Usman and Shavkat Rakhmonov are the two guys that it's between. Okay. That's interesting to me. That's very interesting. Ali then went on to push Kamaru Usman. Ali has never hid the fact that he represents Kamaru Usman as he does Belal. So, but it's between those two, huh? That's the part that had my attention because you've got an odd man out, which is Ian Garry. Ian Garry has a signed bout agreement. He's told us as such. In fact, he signed it as part of the visual component of this statement that he made on Instagram. So, if Shavkat Rakhmonov and Belal are going to fight, which we would all fully understand, like the rankings would support that, we would get that. Does that have anything to do with Ian Garry and Kamaru Usman find one another? That's a great fight. I would be very interested in that fight, but I don't think so. I mean, if you've got those four pieces and you've got massive clues, right? You got massive clues which are going to drive you in certain directions. If you go do a Google search right now, you're not going to find anything that links Kamaru Usman and Ian Garry together. You're just not going to find that. Not to mention, they trained at the same gym. I don't know if you find that interesting or you find that less interesting. But you've got a young up-and-comer and he's completely undefeated. You have an older veteran, but he's also got world championships with him. That would be a very interesting booking. I would have no problem with it. I would like it. It's just not my guess. Whenever we're talking about who we think so-and-so is going to fight, we will have long diatribes and we'll talk about the rankings, we'll talk about who they fought, we'll talk about how many knockouts they have, but all we're really saying is if I could guess and or predict what Dana White is thinking, what Dana White is going to do, that's what we're really verbalizing. That's what we're really speaking to there. I don't know that Dana White would get Kamaru Usman and Ian Garry together. I don't know about that. I have a hard time believing that Ian Garry and Shavkat Rakhmonov are going to fight each other, even though I think I was the first to come and tell you that it looks like those two are fighting each other. You guys remember this? They both went to Instagram, and it was like 4 hours apart, and it was on a weekend. It was a Sunday. And by just a few hours separated, two guys in the same weight class, right by each other in the rankings, put out basically the same announcement, which is, I have a fight, I can't tell you who. I have a signed agreement to fight, but I can't tell you who. So then we put on our Colombo rain jacket and we decide that it's going to be against each other. What would be most interesting if Rakhmonov and Garry were going to fight each other is it leaves you with Ali's pick, Kamaru Usman. But adversely, if it's Rakhmonov, then what does Kamaru do? And there aren't a ton of options, right? There's not a whole bunch of things. See, we're trying to get into the mind of Dana. What is Dana going to do? And I think that Dana's going to see it the way I see it, which is you always need a contender for your champion. Whoever your champion is, right? The recipe and the formula is the same. You still need a contender for him. Kamaru Usman is that contender right now, but he might not be tomorrow. Right? Those guys, that is iron on top of iron. Rakhmonov is going to have his moment. He's just the right age and he's just got the right skills. He's going to have his moment. He could suffer a bump in the road. He will refine. He will reclimb that mountain. He will have his moment. Ian Garry turns out to be a little better than we all knew that he was. Turns out that he's a competitor. Turns out that he can dig deep. Turns out that working with Damian Maia and mastering a couple of these positions that we thought he was without, he's going to have his moment, including if there was a bump in the road or two, he can still find that path again. That's not true for Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman can fight for a world title right now, guys. but he cannot have a bump in the road along the way and then reclaim it. He just can't. Comes with age, right? There's all sorts of things that are put in to these formulas. So when you're a promoter and you know the need and necessity to have challengers, it's one of the reasons you can't match them up together. Let me tell you where I got that line of thinking, which you guys might think is obvious. You might think that it's brilliant. I got to tell you, I didn't know it was a line of the thinking. I went to practice one time in 2012, could have been 2011. I went to practice sitting on information that had not been given to you guys yet, that I was going up to 205 pounds and I was fighting Lyoto Machida. And I did not want to fight Machida, by the way. I mean, it's one of the reasons that I remember this one. I did not want that name to come out of the hat. I would never tell you guys that. I would never reveal that publicly. But that was a style that was weird. And that was a style that I also respected my teammates that tried to fight him, from Randy Couture, Dan Henderson. That wasn't the name that I wanted. Not to mention, I was an 85-pounder. I'm never going to have to see Machida. Wrong. I get a call, I'm fighting Machida. All right. And when I got that call, and I agreed to the fight, one person who had not been told about that fight yet was Dana White. And the very next morning, Dana said no. And Dana even stated why. He said, I have a title contender in Chael. I have a title contender in Machida. As interesting as that fight might be, I lose. At the end of the night, I lose one of my contenders. And I bring in that story I think that you might think that's interesting, but ultimately the guess that we're trying to do is to get into Dana's head. And there's generally a recipe. Like if you follow the history of the sport, there's generally a recipe that everybody gets put into. Formula, be a better word. That everybody gets put into. And I think that that's a very powerful thing that Kamaru has. I do. I don't think you can come back to him. I don't think that you can try him down the line. I don't think it's worth the risk to put him into an elimination match. I think you've got to value those contenders. I think that name and recognition, carrying a card. We've only got one left in this calendar year, and it happens to be December at the fight capital of the world known as Las Vegas. Something is going to happen. We just don't know what. And as I listen to all these interviews, and I've had plenty of time to process this, had plenty of time to think on who should be next for Belal. I have the same conclusion every time, not only on who I want it to be from a fan perspective, who I think that you guys want to be, who the public would accept without any resistance. I think it fits the third criteria, which is trying to get into Dana's mind, looking at history, understanding how he's going to approach things. There was any other match for Kamaru Usman, it's going to be a wildly difficult match, which, by the way, if it doesn't go his way, it eliminates him for life from contendership. Or you can realize he qualifies right now. December, T-Mobile. Who's Belal Muhammad got? I'm putting my guess out there, guys. But it's based on the evidence I just stated. I think he's fighting Kamaru Usman.